What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the podcast. I'm going to cut right to the chase today. We got a very special treat in the house today. We got Debbie Lee, better known by most of her peers as Momma Lee, in the studio, founder of America's Mighty Warriors. Thank you so much for being here.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I know we're both Phoenix-based here. Dane Lomax was kind enough to set this up for us today. He's like, "You want to interview Momma Lee?" I'm like, honestly, I know the story. I know everything about her. You're fresh off of Jocko's podcast, episode 368 of the Jocko podcast too. So I'm honored that I was thought of for this interview. And yeah, I'm just excited to be here. And for those of you that don't know, Momma Lee, obviously the mother of Marc Alan Lee, was the first Navy SEAL killed in action in Operation Iraqi Freedom in 2006. It's something that a lot of people, most people, 99% of parents around the world who lose their loved ones in battle go through, but don't go out of their way to create a mission for it and don't go out of their way to share their story. So that's something that obviously I know you take a lot of great pride in. And was that something that you were able to do, obviously not right away, but something that you knew that you wanted to do?
Well, and I don't know that I ever sat down and wrote, okay, here's the goals, here's what I want to do, here's the timeline of when I'm going to do it. It just happened. And we had, about 7 weeks after Marc was killed, another one of his teammates, Mike Mansour, who was then awarded the Medal of Honor recipient for falling on a grenade. He died. And I knew we had a lot of support in between when we were notified and the funeral. But Marc's teammates were still all deployed. I live in Arizona, so I'm not near the military base there in San Diego or Virginia. And in the grieving process, once the funeral's done, that's kind of when the beginning of the journey starts for you. And I've been a widow for 28 years, so I didn't have a spouse. And it was tough. It was hard. There was nobody else after the funeral was done. I'd have a few people check in, but it was really hard. And I'm not a person to have a pity party and feel sorry for myself and say, oh, poor me. But it was like, okay, this is not good. And I can see that this doesn't happen for anybody else. I can make sure I'm there for the next person. I did not think that next person would be so soon in my healing and grieving process. Like I said, I'd been through the loss of a husband. At that point, it was 12 years before. So I had a clue, but it's so different, so different when it's your child. And I, again, didn't have a plan. I just knew when I was notified, I needed to be there for that family. I needed to be there to be that example of, okay, it's 7 years later. I'm still, or 7 years, 7 days, 7 months, 7 weeks, 7 something. Yeah. It was 7 weeks later. And I was still alive. There literally were times, not only are you emotionally broken, my heart actually hurt. And I remember after the shooting down in Florida at the school there, and one of the teachers was killed, and then her husband had a heart attack and died. And they talked about that at that time. Some of the medical doctors said there is something in grief that some people physically, not just emotionally, but physically, they have issues with their heart. And I'm like, oh my goodness, that's what I was experiencing, not knowing, that's what was going on. So I went over there to be there for the funeral for Mikey. That was the same time that Marc's teammates were coming home. And I knew I needed to be there. I'd gotten to know several of them, and not to be, oh, there's Marc's mom, poor woman, but to be, yay, the rest of my boys are home, And that was the first time, getting to meet the majority of them. So there was kind of a double purpose in that mission. God's gifted me to be an encourager. And so that was part of that. Man, I know these guys are suffering. I know they're hurting. And now their journey is going to start in their grieving process because they've had to stay focused on the mission while they were over there to be safe. Yeah. And so it was kind of a dual purpose. But again, I didn't plan that. It just happened. And then I'd get a call when we had another one of our guys that was wounded and was in Bethesda in Washington, D.C. I just happened to be in Washington, D.C. when they called me. So I could get over to the hospital and be there right away and support the family and encourage the wounded. And then Marc's last letter home talked about doing more random acts of kindness. Yeah. And he said, when's the last time you paid for a stranger's cup of coffee or meal or tank of gas? So I would do those things to honor Marc I could afford to do that. That was something simple. And,
Yeah.
after probably about 2 years, I realized that I did have a new purpose and a new mission. And God had made it pretty clear to me what it was I was supposed to be doing. And that's when I officially started the foundation. But again, even back in 2008, I had no idea where we were going to come to, how much we would grow and the impact that we could have in our, active duty, our troops, our Gold Star families. And so, I always tell people I had no choice. The news that was given to me on August 2nd, 2006. I could have stuck my fingers in my ears. I could have refused to talk to the CACO officer. But that wouldn't have changed the fact that Marc was gone. But I did have a choice how I responded. And to curl up in a ball and feel sorry for myself wouldn't bring him back. Yeah. It'd physically make me sick. Nobody's think I want to be around me. And so my choice was to put on Marc's boots and pick up his weapon and stay in the fight for our families. And it's definitely been a growing process.
Looking back at it years later, when you look at that letter, because obviously it's on the website, it's on all of social media, like everybody has seen that letter that knows
Yes.
the story.
Yeah.
Do you almost look back and say, like, this was supposed to be a part of the story?
Yes.
Like, without this letter, like, would I really be able to get, not necessarily through everything, but, like, it all almost culminates together when you look at that letter with all the things said in there. Like, you look back 15, 17 years later, it's like, a lot of this stuff, almost everything applies in everyday
Yes.
life.
Yes.
Just random acts of kindness, like you were just saying. When was the last time you paid for someone's coffee or paid for strangers, gas tank? Like, that stuff applies in everyday life, in any walk of life, not just, people who are serving. It's all walks of life.
Yes, agreed. And, he wrote that letter about 2.5 weeks before he was killed. That was not intended to be if you're reading this,
Exactly.
I'm gone. And when I got that, he sent it via email. I think maybe 13 people, so close friends and a few family members that were on there. And when I got it and I read it, I'm like, oh my goodness. And I was like, wait, who wrote this? And I literally scrolled back to the top of the page to go, did I open a different email? Because I homeschooled my kids, and Marc was not stupid by any means. He was very smart. But I'd never seen that level of communication in his writing and the depth of it. I mean, you read that and you feel the transformation in Marc as he, deployed overseas, and the things that he saw and the things that he did. And it is powerful.
I mean, it's something that, did you get the letter before he had passed or after?
Yes, before,
Okay.
about 2.5 weeks before. It came on an email thread. And like I said, so powerful. And it was powerful then to read it, and you just sense the change that had happened in Marc since he deployed. But after he passed, when I reread that again, I'm like, oh my goodness. It's almost like, I don't know if Marc knew, had a glimpse into what laid ahead for him.
Yeah.
But man, it just bring it all back together, in a full circle to see that impact. And he ends that letter with, to my family and friends, do me a favor. Pass on the kindness, the love, the precious gift of human life. And he ends that with, halfway through the deployment, can't wait to see your smiling faces. And that still, today, when I say that, moves me, because I would love to see his smiling face. I would love for him to walk in the room and say, hey, Mom.
Right.
And I know one day I will see him again. He was redeployed to heaven, and I will see him again. But to leave such a powerful legacy, not in just the way he lived his life and the way he gave his life, but those words that continue on. We have sold more copies of Marc's, framed last letter home that we have on our website in the last 2 weeks than probably we have the entire time that we've had them on there. Yeah. And so again, such a reminder of, when Jocko read that letter on the podcast, and the impact that Marc is still making around the world in such a crazy way.
And that communication comes through the art of being in that brotherhood, like 100%, right? Because you read that letter and you're like, this is my son's letter. This is his form of communication that I've never seen before. Yes. Like you said, I homeschooled this kid. I've never seen this before. And then when they come back, you had five SEALs stay with you after he died?
We did. We had 5 of them in our home that week. And he tried to explain the brotherhood thing to me. And I'm like, yeah, I get it. You're close to these guys. But your own brother you grew up with for 28 years, that close? And he goes, yes, Mom, that close. Yeah. And I jokingly said, let me remind you, that's not, I didn't birth them, so they really can't be your brothers.
Exactly.
And we kind of left it at that. And then when I had the 5 SEALs, and like I said, most of Mark's teammates were still deployed, but his swim buddy was there. Another close friend that was on a different platoon in SEAL Team 3, but not deployed in Iraq. He was in the Philippines. And I was like, oh my gosh, they love Mark as much as we do. And they're hurting just as much as we are. And that's for me, when the brotherhood thing, I was like, oh, now I get it. And, when that happened, even from the beginning, before they were there, I recognized that Mark's teammates must really be having a hard time. If I'm hurting, I can't make any decisions. I can't think clearly. My brain is mush. But they're in the combat zone. If they don't stay focused, that could be more loss. That could be more life-threatening circumstances. And so I started to build that relationship with those that were deployed, and I realized I had adopted or inherited an amazing group of, I call them my boys, men. And that family has grown so much since then. I used to be very protective of the Charlie boys. Yeah. That's the only ones that had the right to call me Momma Lee. That was Mark's teammates that he was with in combat. And, now more people know me as Momma Lee than if you're like, who's Debbie Lee? I don't know. Who's Momma Lee? Oh, we know Momma Lee. But, and I realized that was, for those veterans that we're working with, that was a term of endearment, and they wanted that relationship. They may not tell their mom some of the things they're struggling with or that they went through, but they could trust me, and that I knew I was strong enough to share those things, and that I would be there not to go, oh, you poor little, come here, come on. It's like, no, to relate with them and say, that's crazy. What you've endured is amazing, but you know what? Get your butt back up. Go do what you need to do. Get the healing that you need. Keep your mission focused and stay on task. In a loving way, but, I could give them the kick in the rear that they needed to be able to do that. And I was talking to one of Mark's teammates from Task Unit Bruiser this morning, who's currently going through our program. And I had written a letter for him for something else he's going through. He goes, Momma Lee, that letter was life-changing for me. It was like the slap in the face I needed with love. So, but it is such a blessing to have so many of these men in my life and know them and work with them and have them be part of my family. There's nothing like the brotherhood in the SEAL community. I've never seen anything in the world that's replicated any other way.
I mean, it's in a weird way, like, talk about storytelling, right? It's not something you asked for. But at the end of the day, when you really look back at everything, the team that he was a part of, just those 5 guys that stayed with you, post-death, you're just like, oh my, like, this is a true brotherhood right here. Mm-hmm. And you look back at some of the names that he served with, Chris Kyle off the top of my head. Like, everybody knows his story as well. Yes. And then you look at, Team Bruiser as well. You mentioned the Jocko Willings, the Leif Babbins, those are some pretty high-end badass individuals.
Yeah, not too shabby overachievers.
That all knew your son.
Yes, yeah.
On that level.
Yeah.
Looking back at it, like, that's not only something that you got to be proud of, but something that you really have to take into perspective of. Yeah. He was surrounded by some of the best people that he could have been surrounded by at that time, and developed him into arguably one of the strongest young men, because you said it yourself, your oldest son was a Marine, your son-in-law was in the Army, your brother as well, right? In
Air Force, yeah.
Air Force,
so I can do the hoo-yah, hoo-rah, hoo-ah. And Air Force,
everything.
What's your chant? You don't have one. I made it up. It's jacuzzi.
Why jacuzzi?
Well, because the Air Force always gets picked on. They do. When I was overseas, the food is so much better at the Air Force. The housing, it is far superior what they get. But we need all branches of the military to do their part. The SEALs wouldn't be able to get to their mission and, be inserted for their special, QRFs if they didn't have the Air Force that, was able to get them in there. And so lovingly, I tease and say jacuzzi because the Air Force gets picked on so bad.
It almost goes hand in hand.
It does. You got to.
You do it out of love.
Yes, I do.
Out of Momma Lee's love. How was, because you mentioned Mark was homeschooled, as well as the other 2 children in the household. How were they raised? What was his upbringing like, for people that don't know? Because I mean, to go from, you know, where he was, you said class clown, you know.
2 years in a row.
Yeah.
Class clown, yes.
To being like the ultimate form of communication in that letter that's everybody's seen. Like that's almost a different person from what you experienced.
Well, and my kids grew up in some pretty tough times. I had, at the age of 23, gone through a divorce. I had a 3-year-old, 18-month-old. Their father was very abusive and tried to kill me. And that's where I'm like, time out, done. I'm out of here. And because of the violence in the marriage, the day that I filed for divorce, it was final. So I found out 2 weeks later I was pregnant with Mark. And I was like, oh, I don't get child support. Dad's not coming to take him on the weekends. You know, there's no light at the end of the tunnel. And now I got another one coming in, and they heard 2 heartbeats. Granted, Mark would be turning 46. Gosh, that doesn't seem possible. Yeah, he'd be 46. And so that was a long time ago. They didn't do ultrasounds back then, you know, at the beginning of the pregnancy or to find out what the birth of, you know, the sex of the child was. And, but they always heard 2 heartbeats when they put the stethoscope, you know, on my stomach and listened. And the only thing they can figure, because there wasn't, like when Mark was born, there wasn't another, you know, baby that had died in womb. So I always tell people, if you knew Mark, you know why they thought there were 2 heartbeats, because he was, and that's what they said. He probably just was moving so much that there was an echo in there. But they did, 2 weeks before he was born, they did an ultrasound to make sure both babies' heads were down and found out it was just one at that point. So I knew I wasn't having twins, but most of my pregnancy, I'm like, oh my gosh, my family's going to double. How on earth am I ever going to get through this? But I was determined I wasn't going to quit, wasn't going to give up, wasn't going to let the, you know, welfare system raise my kids, which would have been real easy because that was, you know, their family background. You know, you needed a raise, you just had another baby. So definitely made lots of mistakes, but, you know, persevered and wasn't going to quit and wasn't going to give up. And I think that's part of that gave my kids the ability, you know, to say, okay, life's going to give you things that we don't expect or we don't want, or they're going to be tough to walk through, but you push through them. You don't quit. And so I think that was a lot of the perseverance that you know, saw in Mark and, you know, in what he did, and went through class 239, got pneumonia, pulmonary edema, got rolled back. He was an hour from being rolled forward where he could have got well and continued with his class. Got rolled back to class 240. Fell in love with a gal who convinced him, you know, not conducive to family life to be a SEAL, which is true. It's tough on the families. And so he rang the bell Monday night of Hell Week in class 240, got sent to the USS Eisenhower, which was in dry dock in Virginia Beach. So then he was given to the Army to drive a shuttle bus. And I have a picture of him with his head on the steering wheel, like, oh my gosh, what have I done? And, you know, I remember him calling saying, Mom, I screwed up. I'm like, what'd you do now? Yeah. You know, he said, I shouldn't have rang the bell. And I said, are you positive? He's like, yep. I said, have you prayed about this? He goes, yeah, that's where I'm supposed to be. I said, then you need to get your butt back there. You need to do whatever it takes. And he had to do extra push, you know, evals and physical fitness stuff and write essays. And maybe that's when started that, you know, that writing kind of came in. But, and meet with officers, because it's easy, the ones that quit, when they go back, lots of times will quit again. And so they don't rarely let someone come back and go through again, but was graduated class 251. He was in running for the Honor Man, which is something that's voted on by your teammates in your class. And I remember that night he called and he said, Mom, I didn't get Honor Man. I'm like, Mark, you tried it, you know? And I get it. I'm competitive. But so he definitely, you know, took the mistakes he's made and learned from those and pushed forward and, you know, became a Navy SEAL. That's
what makes the story at the end of the day, right? Going through those trials and tribulations and then overcoming, and for him to do what he ultimately ended up doing, you know, sacrificing himself for the better part of his country. When you talk about some of those experiences growing up, whether it be him alongside with your other son and daughter, like, was faith always implemented early on when you talk about some of those struggles, or was it implemented later on?
It was later on. Yeah. I was a believer. I accepted, you know, Christ as a child. We went to church every Sunday, but we didn't live it in our home, so it wasn't taught or developed, or there was not much growth. When I went through, there were some childhood things. You know, I found out when I was 16 that the man I thought was my dad was not my dad.
At 16?
At 16,
wow.
yeah. And so there was some not good male role models in my life, after I went through the divorce and the abuse that was taken there. It's kind of like, you know what? I know you're God, but I got this. I think I can do a better job than you. And pretty arrogant and stupid, but, God let me to, mess up my life pretty bad, and it was I was 28 when I completely came back and, surrendered everything. But so those years up to 28, Chris is 8, Cheryl's 6, and Mark before. Yeah, I guess that'd be right. The beginning of it, they didn't have it. And that was when the faith really became, I understood the screw-ups I made. I understood the grief, that I'd caused to God. And I was willing to say, do not pass go, do not collect $200. I will sit here on the shelf and not get in any more trouble. And, I think that was the point. I totally understood the forgiveness piece of it. God says he hates 7 things, and I'd done 6 of them. I was faithful in my marriage. You can go read the rest of the garbage that I did. But to have that much forgiveness and to know how much I had done wrong was overwhelming to experience that. And so it was that point that I understood that forgiveness, so I wanted to know more who this God was that could forgive me. And then I opened a preschool and kindergarten, a Christian preschool and kindergarten in Oregon. And when he, put that in my thoughts, that's what he wanted me to do. I'm like, oh, no, you don't want to use me. Yeah. Remember all that crap that's in my past that I did? And he's like, what? Scripture says our sin is as far as the east is from the west. He didn't see it. I did, and I needed to learn to let that go and accept that forgiveness and live with that. But that was really the time when it started turning in the growing process, and the faith started becoming of what we did every day in our life, not just what we did in church on Sunday. No. And so for all of us, it was a growing process. We grew in our faith together. So.
When you tell someone that you surrendered yourself to God, for people who are either trying to get into it and get to that level, that personal relationship with Christ, because there's a lot of Christians out there that experience that, and there's a lot of people who go to church on Sundays looking to experience it but haven't truly felt that. Like, what did that mean to you in that, defining moment?
And I think that's a good point, because definitely in the military community, you don't want to surrender.
Yeah.
That's not something. And so it's not that type of surrender, but it's saying, okay, everything that I am. And for me, it was kind of like I could picture in my mind, I had what was left of my life in my hands. There wasn't much that I could offer. And I just took it and laid it at his feet and said, this is all I am, this is all I have, but it's all yours. I'm nothing without you. And so I think that's that turning point. And I was always afraid that God was going to make me this mamsy-pamsy, wimpy, have no backbone. But I was willing. At 28, I was willing for him to make me that way. And after I laid, everything at his feet and, told him, I'm yours, whatever you want to do with me, it was at that point that was such a factor of, oh my goodness, I don't ever want to do anything again that's going to grieve him or hurt him. I want to know what he likes. I want to know what he doesn't like. And again, I think people need to be really careful, because you can get very legalistic and it can look like it's a checklist. Did you read your Bible today? Check. Did you memorize scripture? Check. Did you pray? Check. Oh, look at me. I'm so much better than everybody else. And that's wrong. That's wrong. That's not what it's about. It's just like if you're in a marriage and you want to do those things for your husband or your wife that, please them and bring them joy. And you want to reflect your love back to them. And I didn't have, like I said, much I could give back, but I wanted everything that I had, give back to him. Did that make me perfect? No, I still made mistakes. I still sin at times. Do I purposely do that? No. I've learned those things that he likes. And I try to live my life to please and honor him, but I'm not perfect.
No, every single day you make mistakes.
Yeah.
All depends on what you define as a sin, too,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Other people have their different perspectives. We were talking about Tim Tebow before we came on.
Yeah.
Arguably, you met him, one of the nicest individuals ever, gets flagged for God knows why, right?
Yes. And yet he's so sincere about his faith. He wasn't, when he was playing in the NFL, he didn't, point direction when he made a touchdown or whatever for himself. He did that to point others to God and to who he was in a sincere way. And it's sad that he, still does at times, takes those hits attacking him. But he just rubs it off his shoulder and continues to be who he is. And I love that about him.
And when it comes to your community that you've been able to build over the last several years, when you look at it from a Christian standpoint, not necessarily the best, but someone that you've seen just active daily walks of life, like he almost walks in the eyes of Christ in a sense. I'm sure all of them have their different,
And I think there's a lot of different people that do that. Like you said, Tim Tebow, I think, he does an amazing job. I think there's a lot of people, and it probably would take a little more time for me to reflect on that and give you names, but I run across people all the time who live their life and maybe aren't notable. People don't see who they are or what they do. And I don't think any of us as believers should be out there to be seen, We should be living our life, hopefully that others see Christ, not us doing what we're doing. But I think there's a lot of people, but I'd have to think on that one a little bit more to give you some specifics. But Tim Tebow, definitely.
Oh, yeah. And we'll talk about it afterwards, too. But I feel like with everything that you've gone through, too, because, again, when Marc passed, obviously something it's every parent's worst fear. I can only imagine, right?
Yeah.
But you've also been through death. You've been through grief, losing your husband, I'm sure when your oldest son told you that he was going to be a Marine, your heart drops, right? Just as a mother, it's like, wow.
Well, remember, this was 2000.
Yeah.
We hadn't been at war since, we'd had Desert Storm, but it didn't last very long. So us as civilians, we don't really relate to that. Mm-hmm. I grew up at the tail end, graduated high school at the very tail end of Vietnam. So there were people, that I knew that had served. And that was, on the nightly news. We saw the KIAs, the, missing in action, the wounded. We saw those numbers every night in the news, flashing across the screen. We knew that. But this had been how many years later? So when he went in, I thought it was going to be great, and I still do. I'm very proud of him and the choice that he made to become a Marine. But I wasn't concerned about him going to combat. We're not at war, My son-in-law went in, same thing. Man, he's going to get a great education. This will be good, for their families, some stability. Same thing with Marc. It was May 2001. We hadn't had 9/11. We hadn't been attacked. But man, that morning in 9/11, the reality is like, ooh, baby, we're going to war.
Mm-hmm. Is that your first thought? Like, I have 2 sons that are active military.
And I knew, that there was going to have to be some retaliation for us being attacked here in America. We could not allow that. And we tried everything, before. It's not like then on 9/12 we were all deploying everybody. Exactly. We tried sanctions and all kinds of different things before. And I do believe war should always be a last resort. But there are times when we have to say, no, we will not tolerate this any longer. You will not come to America and attack us here without consequences for that. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it was tough. It was hard.
I mean, I can only imagine, and especially in 3 different branches. At that point, is your daughter's husband?
Yes.
Well,
he's gone through OCS. My oldest son, Christopher, was in Okinawa the whole time. He wasn't deployed to Iraq or Afghanistan. Volunteered numerous times over and over, but he's the only comms guy for his unit, and they're like, if the unit doesn't go, you don't go. He did finally get orders to Iraq a couple weeks after he was married, met his wife over in Okinawa. They live about a mile from me and have 5 beautiful kids, so I've got 5 grandkids that are half Japanese and amazing family. But and he struggles with that some. He feels like if he would have been in Iraq, he could have saved his little brother. And like I tell him, there was someone bigger than you that was in control that day. God didn't cause Marc's death, but it didn't take him by surprise. It wasn't like he looked the other way and got busy and went, oh my gosh, I didn't know that was going to happen. Yeah. And we get to see almost 17 years later, it's kind of like the story of Joseph. His brothers try to, make it look like he's dead. They throw him in, a pit and go home and tell his dad, they've just been killed. And, in that story there, it says they meant it for bad, but God meant it for good. And God has used Marc and his story to change lives in such a crazy way and save so many lives. We had a Navy SEAL that went through our program. It's probably been 4 years ago now. And I always try to follow up with the guys after they've gone through and find out what symptoms are better and what's changed for them. And he'd gone through, that he's sleeping better and that his memory's better and he's not having the issues with anger that he was. And he said, "You saved my life." And I said, "Well, you were willing to give your life for me. This is a no-brainer, that I can help you do that." And he paused and he said, "Stop." And I'm like, "Uh-oh, made a Navy SEAL mad. This is probably not going to end well." And he said, "I literally would not be alive today if it wasn't for you and your foundation and the therapies you provided." And when he said that so strongly, and he said, "You saved my life," I thought of Marc, his final actions. He stood out in the direct line of fire 3 different times on his final day, willingly gave his life to save his teammates. And I'm like, oh my gosh, he's still saving his teammates, He's not physically here, but he is still saving his teammates' lives.
He still has that purpose that you get to live on too as your purpose. And that's the one thing, like that story right there is why you keep doing it.
Yeah.
Reactions like that, like you're actually helping these people who go through not just the physical struggle of what they do, but the mental capacity that it tolls on you after a while.
Yeah.
The PTSD, the experiences that nobody else in the world really experiences, right? And we were talking about it a little bit before we came on too. Like you weren't knowledgeable of a lot of this stuff while they were deployed. Obviously, you learn more the more you learn about it, and you build the foundation and are surrounded by people that experienced it. What was that like for you, really diving headfirst into all of this stuff and gaining a real knowledge about it, while you're trying to build this? Is it easy to understand, or is it just...
Well, and I think because it comes in bits and pieces, it's not like it was, this big knowledge dump that, I had to absorb it all. It's just, doing the different things with the guys, trying to get the hyperbaric oxygen approved through commands and meeting with generals and admirals and, going to Iraq, being in the combat zone where I got a glimpse into what's the lay of the land look like, what's the smells like, that helps me relate more to our veterans and talking to them, I can relate to them on military terms, when they're struggling, when they come back home, and I'm like, hey, you're still in a battle. You got a different enemy, but you're still in a battle. When you went to combat, did you study the enemy? Well, yes, of course we did. I'm like, did you know their tactics? Well, yeah, duh. Did you put your full armor on when you went out in battle? Or did you have a day you're like, I don't think I'm going to take my weapon today. It's too heavy. My shoulders are kind of killing me. I won't need it. I'll be good. No, that's ridiculous. Did you ever say, I'm not going to put my body armor on? No, again, you put your full kit on. You went prepared for whatever the enemy would throw at you. You maybe even put an extra grenade on your belt. And I said, you're in a battle now. It's a different battle, but you got to study the enemy. You got to know his tactics, and you got to make sure you put your full armor on every day. You got your full kit, and you're ready for whatever he's going to throw at you. And that's relatable to them. But again, it's what I learned bit by bit and still continue to learn about who these guys are, their tactics. I didn't know when Marc was in. I couldn't have told you what rank, captain, is that, admiral, is that Navy, or is that, I didn't know, but I've learned those things because this is my world now. This is, who I'm working with, and it's important for me to understand them, to get to know these things. But yeah, I've learned a lot, as a civilian about the military. I've learned a lot, way more than I ever thought I would know about brain health, as we've gone through our Helping Heroes Heal program and, providing those therapies that are healing them. It's been amazing.
Where do you think you'd be right now in the process? Because you mentioned, obviously, the grieving process, very difficult. It starts at the funeral, immediately after the funeral. That's something that nobody wants to go through. Nobody can really get over.
Yeah.
But the fact that there was a death so close to that, like you said, and they wanted you to be a part of it because, you were the first one. Like, he's the first Navy SEAL to die in action in that operation.
Yeah.
If that death didn't happen, where do you think you'd be in all of this? What would the grieving
Well,
process look like for
I would
you?
not have had a foundation. I had just retired, I'd moved to Phoenix. I was just going to, visit my son in Okinawa, and my daughter and her husband were down in Fort Polk, Louisiana at the time. And, Mark was in San Diego. I'd go visit my kids where they were at. Nobody was still home in Hood River where we live. So I decided to come to the sunshine and warm weather because I feel so much better down here. My body doesn't ache as much. And so I think I probably would have been just traveling some and, laying on the beach somewhere maybe. But definitely had a new purpose and a new mission, and that got old really fast when I was down here because I was here for a little bit before Mark did die. And I was like, oh my goodness, I'm by myself. I'm 50 at that point. Retirement's not as fun as I thought it was going to be. There's nobody to go do anything with. And so I had, started selling Tupperware just to have something to do but still control my schedule. And I was winning trips, to different destinations for the sales. And so I know that either way I would have got bored, but I'm not sure what I would have been doing. I'm blessed with 11 grandkids, and they're a big part of my life, so they probably would have been, more of that freedom to spend with them. I'd have found something to do because it was, I'm not a sit on the couch and watch eat bonbons and watch soap operas kind of person. So, yeah.
I mean, 11 grandkids. What do you see in them, watching them grow up, when you look at your own 3 kids and raising them? Because, again, to raise 3 kids, 2 of which served, and then obviously your daughter being a part of all of that mix as well with her husband. Like, what do you see in those 11 grandkids, the way they're raised, the way they carry themselves, even at the youngest of ages?
Yeah. Well, and the oldest one will be turning 23 in March. And he actually made me a great-grandma a year ago. The baby just turned a year old. And then he deployed to Poland. So I'm seeing some of those things following through there. I see a lot of things in my grandkids that I do much differently now than I did parenting. I was in such a stressful place as a single mom with no child support, no help. That I was just kind of always on the edge. I worked 3 jobs most of the time just to make ends meet, and, lots of times would flip off the handle and be screaming, yelling, get your dog, get in the car, and that's not me now. Things are so much more when the grandkids are around, so different, and things that I wish I had known differently back then, but, glad that I've learned some different things now to be able to continue to put into my grandkids' life. 5 of them are near me. The other 6 are up in Oregon, so I don't have the ability, because of distance, to be quite as active in their life. But, yeah. And then my oldest grandson that's here, my son Christopher, who was the Marine, he's looking at going in the Naval Academy. So, yeah.
It all starts again.
It does, yes.
Right? It all comes full circle in a family that kind of bleeds it.
Yeah. And you and I kind of talked about this before, but we are blessed to have so many amazing freedoms in America. And things are changing a little bit in our country right now, but it's still the best country in the world. And how selfish of me would it be to say, bring me all those freedoms. I want everything America has to offer, but send your kid to go?
Exactly.
No. And I'm proud of, my son-in-law, my son, Mark, their families, because the families serve as well, who've given so much for the freedoms that we enjoy every day, and my brother. So,
do you think, well, obviously, you have a different perspective on that of, the freedoms that we do have. You don't take any of it for granted compared to, families who don't really have anybody serving, who have gone through that. Because we talked about it. It's a calling. It's not like you're just like one day, like, I want to do this for a career. It's almost as if, like, I need to do this.
Yes.
This is what God put me on this, green earth to do. And you still feel that way wholeheartedly?
Yes.
Like, okay, like, you want to do this? Absolutely. This is your calling.
Yep. Yeah, 100%. I think I may be a little more reserved now with some of the leadership that we have now in our government at the, top ends of the military, that I might encourage them to wait a little bit longer. But I do believe that there are those who are designed to be warriors, to defend us, to protect us, to keep us safe. And I'm proud of all those that do make that choice to do that so that we can live free here.
Do you have a specific story? I'm sure there's hundreds of them that you have when starting America's Mighty Warriors. And we talked about one, just the way that you affect some of these, people who are fighting in combat and people who are coming home, going through these mental struggles of everything that they've gone through. Is there a specific time where you've had an interaction with someone, a part of that community, where you were like insanely like, this is why we do this?
Oh, I think almost every day I have those interactions. One that I can think of recently, unfortunately, we lost Bobby Ramirez, who was the commander of SEAL Team 1, who took his life in December. And we just had the funeral a couple weeks ago. And a lot of people there at the funeral and the reception afterwards, one of the wives came up to me that I didn't know, never met before. And she gave me a big hug and she just said, we have watched you for years and you give us that hope that if the worst happened, we could get through it. And of course, I don't do what I do with that mission in mind. My mission is to be able to, those who sacrificed and given so much, to try to restore their health to them, to make sure our other Gold Star families who've lost a loved one know that we won't ever forget their hero and we won't forget them. But, it's kind of scary when somebody says that to you, but it's like, wow. And they said, you are the one that's the light in that example for us that gives us hope. And the name of the house that we have here in Arizona is the Heroes Hope Home. And that's where Gold Star families can come stay for free, and we love and pamper on them. You'll see hope signs all over. For me, the courage and hope are probably my two mantras or character qualities that are so important to me. And it is because of the hope that I have in Christ that I can have the courage that I have to do what I do. Marc was the same way, because that hope that he had courage to go out, as Jocko said, in that front turret gunner, over and over and over, the most dangerous place you can be. And he would go out on those missions every time with a smile on his face. But because he had that hope, he could have that courage. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what's so amazing. But there are story after story of our families and what they've gone through. And it's not me that's having this impact. It's Marc, the way he lived his life, the way he gave his life, his last letter home. But it's God orchestrating all those things to make those paths cross when whoever we're supposed to, cross with, like, Dane hooking us up so we can continue our mission, so we can spread the word, so those that need the help they need can reach out. They know where to go. So those that have the finances that can give to be able to help the mission. On average, it's $20,000 for every one of our veterans that goes through our year-long program. We had 175 right now on the program. It's not chump change, and to be able to continue to do that. 96% of what comes in does go back to our active duty troops, our veterans, our Gold Star families. We work really hard to be conservative, but we're blessed to have a lot of people that volunteer their services to help, complete our mission, whether it's, graphic design, web, lawyers, CPAs. By the way, we do need a CPA to do an audit for us if they want to donate that, because that's about $10,000 to do an audit. That's one of our veterans halfway through a program to save their life. I would rather, someone that could do that, donate their services for the audit, than, and be able to apply that money to saving another life. But yeah.
And was that a difficult learning curve, the business side of everything, putting everything together? Because I feel like the people came together pretty quickly. But at the same time, when it comes to finances and learning what these guys are going through, it was like you learn bits and pieces every day, still do. But
yes.
How difficult was that business?
Well, and I think I was blessed that I had a preschool and kindergarten for 15 years. So a lot of the basic business things, accounting, payroll, those kind of things, I had done, learned some marketing and, relationship building. But it is very different running a nonprofit than it is running a business. When you run a business, part of that incentive there is, what you make in your profits from, operating your business. A nonprofit, you don't. For 10 years, I didn't even take a salary. And on average, you know, in the beginning, I was probably working 40 hours a week, but I'd say through the years, it's probably been 80's been more typical, you know, to work an 80-hour week. So I was, you know, working my tushy off, but I'm not driven by money. Yes, we all need money to get through in our world, but I'm not a person that's driven by money. I was debt-free. I had a couple of rental properties that provided some income, and I wanted to, you know, see our veterans get as much help as they could. I wanted to make sure that we started as a foundation that was reputable. It's so hard when you find out you donated to somebody and 30% went to the cause and 70% went to fundraising and exorbitant salaries. You know, I'm like, okay, what's happened in your hearts that you've lost the purpose of the mission here? You know, and so I was really committed, you know, to making sure that that's where it was. That was much more important to me, to be established as a strong foundation that spends their money frugally and that, you know, really does take care of our veterans. We're not out there just having a big party for everybody.
No.
So, and again, not that there's people out there and you know, say, well, it's nonprofit, nobody should make any money. Well, are you willing to come donate 40 hours a week for us? No, and that's not what we're asking our volunteers, you know, to do. But we are blessed to have a lot of people around the world that donate different things and help promote us and help raise awareness. And, you know, as I was coming in here today, I got a text of another organization that said, we know you don't do a lot in the mental health piece. And it actually was somebody related to Bobby Ramirez that doesn't know that we were involved in that. And that was one of those random acts of kindness that we did to help with the funeral expenses. But, you know, can you talk to this person? They're not a veteran, but they need help. They're related. You know, it's really killing them. And so, you know, you don't ever know the impact or who's going to reach out or who needs help or who needs just an encouraging word. You know, back to Mark's last letter home, pass on the kindness, the love,
Right.
the precious gift of human life. We can all do that. Whether we're on the right, the left, in between, we don't vote, black, white, purple, we can all do that.
It doesn't even apply to just people who served. It's all
No.
walks of life.
Yes.
Everybody needs
Yes.
a helping hand.
Yes.
And I think that's what's so strong about this book right here, which, again, Jocko kind of talks about the story as well. But if you guys haven't read it, there it is. I think everybody should read this book.
Yes, I agree. And we do, you know, plug for the website. We do sell those on our website.
Yep.
We have them autographed by Jocko and Leif as well. But powerful book, you know, and we're very active when they do their 2-day leadership training. I'm at all the musters. And but this is so applicable to everything in life. People are like, oh, yeah, leadership strategies for a Navy SEAL. Well, I'm not going to be a Navy SEAL. What am I going to need to know? I can tell you that book applies to everything, whether it's raising your children, whether it's in relationships, whether it's at work, family relationships. It is a life-changing book. It really is. And not just because they're my boys, but it really is. I've done a lot of different leadership conferences and read books, you know, before. But there's something so unique about this. And, you know, obviously they dedicate the book to Marc, and a lot of stories in there about Marc on the mission and deployment, but powerful book. And he also does kids' books that's called Way of the Warrior Kid, and the little boy in the book is Marc. Not his, you know, life story growing up, but you'll find some similarities in there, but a great leadership book for kids.
And it's crazy to see how their stories of, you know, these are unique stories that 1% of the world experiences. Even some of the most insane athletes in the world don't experience what these guys went through.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they're able to relate to such a wide audience with their message, just being like, we all go through certain shit.
Yeah. Just powerful, a lot of common sense stuff, but I think we tend to be lacking in the common sense department in America recently, but it is some phenomenal, you know, words of wisdom and encouragement and application. And that's just the first book. He's got several others after that. But
I mean, that's where it all starts, is the
Yes.
action, right?
Yeah.
Actions speak louder than words.
Yes.
At the end of the day, it's like you can talk the talk, but if you're not willing to walk the walk like
Yeah.
some of these guys did, like you're just wasting everybody's
yeah,
time.
agreed.
So what is, like, because we talked about, you had like a dozen different projects that you were saying off the top of your head before we started of what you have on your calendar. Like, what's the some of the bigger things that you guys have coming out here in the next few weeks, next few months?
Sure. So Marc was born on March 20th. So every year at Scottsdale Gun Club, we do Marc's birthday bash. This year, we try to do it as close to his birthday, but it's always spring break. And so everybody's, always out of town or can't travel to get in. And so we've moved that to April 15th, and great event. It's casual. It's not a, black tie gala, get a tux, get a dress. That was Marc. It's put your flip-flops on, get your cargo shorts, come on down. We'll have a great barbecue. Your drinks for the night are included. Amazing auction items. You might even get a chance to go do some special experience with the Navy SEAL. And it's just a great way to continue to remember Marc and celebrate his birthday, but to celebrate and raise funds for what we're doing to continue to change the lives of our veterans. I'll be at muster for, with Jocko and Leif in Orlando, I want to say the beginning of April, 4th, 5th, and 6th. It might be close. I've got the 3rd to the 8th on my calendar because I go in a little bit early and late. We have our retreat coming up in May. We do that each year in Texas for our Gold Star families and for our families that are going through our Helping Heroes Heal program. That's a week-long retreat there. We'll do Carry the Load just before that with them in Texas. We've got Limitless Expo coming up here in June with which will be here in Phoenix, a financial leadership conference. But they do a fundraiser for us, and within a half an hour, they'll raise $250,000 just to auction off a few items. Again, the experiences, go spend the day with Robert Kiyosaki or, some of those leaders in whether it's real estate, investment, finance world. But, and that's Tarl Yarber and, excuse me, he's been a great support for the foundation as well. So that's just a few of the things that have been brought off the top of my head.
Just the things off the top of your
And
head.
then running
right
the
there.
foundation day to day. So.
And where can people, those who are looking to get involved with the foundation, website, social media?
Yep. Website, America's with an S on the end, Mighty Warriors, again with an S on the end.org. Most of our social media is at America's Mighty. You can find us on Facebook, America's Mighty Warriors. So would love to. If you need help, if you're struggling with post-traumatic stress, traumatic brain injury, and you're a combat veteran, please don't do this alone anymore. You didn't go out on your mission. You didn't go out in combat alone. You went as a team. There's a team here ready to help you. I know you may have tried several different therapies that you feel like didn't work, but trust me, these are two of the very few that are actually healing you, not just masking the symptoms. If you've got the financial wherewithal that you can sponsor a veteran, please send us a check. If you can donate $1 a month, if everybody did something, we owe it to our men and women who've served. And I think we often hear about leave no man behind. And I really feel like that's what we're doing with our men and women that are coming back home. Especially in the Spec Ops community, they get the best missions, they get the best training, they get the best equipment, and they get done. It's like, bye, see ya. And we are doing some things to try to change that a little bit, but it's still not where it needs to be. And the sacrifices that our men and women have made with their mental health, with their physical health, with their families, it is our responsibility as a nation to make sure that we restore their health back to them as close as we can get it to who they were before they deployed. And I feel like as a government, as a country, we have failed big time there. As a foundation, I think we've done amazing in our purpose and our mission. But we've been doing this for over 10 years, and we've had 300 veterans go through our program. We currently have 175 in our program. That's just a drop in the bucket of our men and women who need that help, who've sacrificed so greatly for us. So, think about your finances. If you can sacrifice a monthly donation of any amount, it will make a difference. And I think that's much more important than saying to our troops, thank you for serving. Yep. Really? Okay. So you appreciate that. What are you going to do past that? How are we going to help them?
Goes back to that action.
Yeah.
Of everything else.
Yeah.
And I know you're a busy woman. I know you got to call at like 2 o'clock, so I'll wrap this up. I do appreciate you taking the time today and sharing your story. Again, it's Marc's purpose that he gets to live on
Yes.
17 years later through you as well as your team.
Yeah.
Again, that's americasmightywarriors.org. If you guys are looking for help, anybody looking to be involved in the foundations, again, americasmightywarriors.org. Momma Lee, thanks so much for taking the time again today.
You bet. And I just had a final thought, as you said that. Marc, the meaning of the name Marc means mighty warrior.
Which is incredible, right?
And he definitely lived up to his name. But that's why our foundation is America's Mighty Warriors, because it's not just about Marc. It's about every man and woman who served. It's about every other family. And that's why it's America's Mighty Warriors.
Great final touch right there. This was episode 608 of the podcast, guys, with Debbie Momma Lee. Again, head on over to americasmightywarriors.org for more information.